Why did a private Facebook group founded by plugged-in young Turks from the media and advertising world become a vehicle for trolling and cyberbullying of women and minorities? It started 10 years ago. In 2009, the creation of a private Facebook page called the Ligue of LOL, as in laugh out loud. It quickly gets out of hand with persistent bullying, pranks, and threats targeting mostly young women looking for their big break in journalism. Once the attacks entered the public realm, they then took on the life of their own. Media's Hour of Reckoning is the headline in Libération, the center-left daily newspaper, whose fact-checking service broke the story. Libé has suspended one of its own staffers and a freelancer who happens to be the original founder of this Ligue of LOL. We'll have more on his apology later. Now, since the story broke, the suspensions, the sackings, the resignations keep coming. So does the testimony, including from one former journalist who returned to Twitter for the first time in a decade to tell her story. So how much do you police social media? The government is now talking of extending the statute of limitation for cyberbullying. The president has spoken already of a bill to end anonymity on the web. More broadly, how much have mentalities evolved since 2009? Today in the France 24 debate, the Ligue du LOL scandal. And this to talk about it, attorney Ruben Sfadj, co-founder of Jamais sans elle, Never Without Her, the advocacy group that promotes gender parity.
Absolutely. Thank you. Hi.
Thanks so much for being with us. I want to thank as well Ketsia Mutombo, chair and co-founder of the feminist organization, Organization Against Cyberbullying. The Feminist Organization Against Cyberbullying. That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I want to thank as well Julie Gommes, cybersecurity manager at Cognizant Technology Consulting. Hi. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
And from Capistrano Beach, California, psychologist Diana Graber, author of Raising Humans in Digital World. And you teach, by the way, cyber civics. Is that in high school, middle school?
It's actually middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students.
All right, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, where there's a lot of cyberbullying. Thank you for being with us. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, it was 2009. Facebook was less than 4 years old. Twitter in its mere infancy. And those up-and-coming men of the advertising and journalism world are now being called to task. Selena Sykes explains.
A macho online boys club high on power, harassing fellow journalists. Just some of the words used to denounce the so-called Ligue du LOL or League of LOL, made up of around 30 predominantly male journalists at some of France's biggest media outlets. Over a decade, members used anonymous social media accounts to mock mainly female journalists and bloggers. Dozens of victims have since come forward, including science journalist Florence Porcel.
Some of it was completely degrading, like photoshopping my face onto the body of a porn actress in an evocative position. You could feel the malice behind it and a real desire to ruin people.
The closed Facebook group was set up by Vincent Glad in 2009. In an apology on Twitter, the journalist said he had created a monster.
The aim of the group wasn't to harass women, just to have a laugh. But our way of amusing ourselves quickly got out of hand, and we didn't realise.
Ligue du LOL was exposed by the left-leaning newspaper Libération, which is itself at the heart of the scandal. Glad, who freelanced for the publication, as well as a senior online editor, have been suspended.
I was disgusted when reading the tweets and especially the accounts from victims. It's an absolute disgrace. I was unaware of the League of LOL's existence, and so now action must be taken.
Several journalists working at other French media outlets have also been disciplined. The Ligue du LOL has been denounced by France's gender equality minister and was called a group of losers by the Minister for Digital Affairs. Those found guilty of cyber harassment in France can face up to 3 years in prison and a €45,000 fine.
Ketsia Mutombo, why did they target these women?
I think we need to understand the power dynamics where they were playing. Like, this was a group of mainly white, pretty much rich male, and they were leading the social media outbreak, and it was necessary at this time to have a huge digital presence online. So they built their platform on harassing women and minorities, and it's leading them to better professional positions.
Yeah, because it starts as a private Facebook group, but then it kind of goes public.
It was a private group, Facebook group at first, but it became like an internet culture where everyone at this time needed to make its own joke, and downplay the work of upcoming internet stars such as female YouTuber, or feminist activists. So it was really, it was like not a formal organization, but it was a plan to downplay, not how I could say it, but some narratives were not heard at this time, such as anti-racism, feminism. All those people were not heard on the French internet space.
Yeah, Vincent Glad talks in his apology, or writes in his apology, about quashing women who profess to be feminism, saying for him, in those days in 2009, we wrongly thought that feminism was simply just about gender pay equality. What did you make of that apology by Vincent Glad?
That's not, for me, that's not real apologies. But we have to go back and to think about 2009. That's when I joined Twitter too.
Because Twitter goes public in November of 2007, so it's brand new, right?
Yeah, it's brand new.
There's not many people on Twitter.
At this time, there was not many people, and we were like lots of communities, bloggers, journalists, people who are talking each other with everybody, but who were talking in private with people from their community too. And at this time, we built some things, and we had a word called, it was in French, it was called netiquette. It was just the way to be on internet.
Oh, so netiquette as in the proper etiquette, code of conduct.
Yeah, but that's just good educations like parents.
Because you saw the danger back then.
Just be polite, say hello, say goodbye, don't harass people. It was just normal for us to be like that. And everybody was like that. That's what we think. But in the same time, there was this group of people doing that.
Ruben Sfadj, you're even more of a precursor because you said you were on Twitter when it was not even yet in its current form.
I originally joined Twitter when it used to advertise itself as a group messaging service. And you would actually send SMSs to a London-based number.
And what Judy's describing, how it was communities, and they quickly realized that you have to have certain codes of conduct and be polite.
I think most social networks start out the same way, in a very community-driven manner. And it's usually the success story behind any social network is that same story of a small community-driven network grows out to be something much more meaningful and pro-minute. Now,
and this one turns out to be something much more sort of, how would you describe it, boys? Sort of locker room humor? It's more than locker room humor, though, because it becomes, it becomes actual...
I read an expression on Twitter about it from a French blogger who called it the cool kids treehouse. And that's a bit what this Ligue du LOL was. The problem is they start out, and it starts as a cool kids treehouse, ends up as a mob. A true online and offline mob going
because on. People who have nothing to do with this private Facebook group, once they see them picking on someone, they join in.
Maybe so, and probably, but I think even the guys from within the group were trying to prove maybe to each other or to themselves or to a bit older and more established advertising figures or journalism figures that they got the internet culture thing, and then they were able to get some buzz going about everything and anything. And when the mob culture starts to set in, the easiest thing to do is to harass women, minorities, and more generally, just people that, you know, that you just don't like. And I think that's where it started going wrong, that you went from the cool kids treehouse to the mob culture.
Go from the cool kids treehouse to the mob culture. Diana Grabber, as the outsider looking in, your thoughts, the main publications where these people work are left of center, hip, you know, from the, you might even say, hipster, sort of Parisian cool places. Does it surprise you that these are the types of people doing that?
Well, no, because the way the internet is, you know, there's something that happens called online disinhibition. And what that means is that, you know, when you're hiding behind a screen, often you feel emboldened to say or do things that you would never say in real life. So, you know, that makes it kind of easy to do things that are inappropriate, mean, cyberbully, etc. But that being said, I think that we're kind of being wise to that. You know, as we get further and further into the internet, we're realizing that these so-called private groups, as you just described, aren't really that private at all. People eventually find out about them, and this gets worse and worse. So I'm hoping, and that's one thing that I work towards, that future generations will be smarter and wiser about how to use the internet. Someone brought up a very good point, teaching etiquette. You know, the first generation of internet users were more or less thrown on there without any rules or without any guidance. And so I think it's super important for us to teach the next generation that there is an etiquette that you take.
Yeah, except Diana, when you listen to Ruben Sfadj, you get the impression it's going to get worse, not better, if the minute somebody incites mob rule sets in.
It will get worse unless we do something about it. And I suggest that education is the answer. You know, we really need to make time in our schools to teach children, to teach young people that these are the etiquette rules that you take online. These are the consequences that happen if you don't. And more importantly, you know, when I hear there's a mob, I want to know why someone in that mob didn't stand up to be the upstander. Why didn't someone say, hey, this is wrong, let's turn this around? And I believe that if we teach the next generation, you know, here are some tactics that you can take if you're in a situation like that to turn the ship around. So I really have hope that we can educate the next generation to be better than we've been.
Again, it's the question of being out of sight, hiding behind the anonymity. I know the journalist Vincent Glad was saying how it's what he should have done, that he at any point could have terminated it. He was the founder of that group. Lots of reactions. This one from journalist Matthew Fraser, that French journalism has its own Bollington club on Twitter called Ligue du LOL. Some of them surprisingly at left-wing paper Libération. Are you surprised, Ketsia Mutombo?
I'm not really surprised. I think masculinity goes beyond the political spectrum between left and right, and this is really what was the point here. This was a group of men making jokes on women, minorities, and accepting the fact that they were powerful men and they were leaders in their professional fields. And I totally agree with the fact that we need to educate the younger people about having healthier debates on the internet, because at some point we all believe that internet needed to be a place where we didn't have to got limits, and we could say and act like we wanted upon each other.
Now you're from the next generation, right? Because this happened 10 years ago. It happened between 2009 and 2012. Since then, you've had the Dominique Strauss-Kahn affair. You've had the Me Too movement. You've had Harvey Weinstein. You've had sexual scandals involving politicians here in France. Would you say the country's changed?
I think social medias are becoming more inclusive. Now we're hearing more queer voices, more voices from people with disabilities, from people of color. It's just like now people just don't want to listen to the same narratives, like the white men, older men, and...
Because the option is, of course, to stay off Twitter, but you're saying people choose to go on it rather than...
Yeah, they choose to go on Twitter and other social networks to build communities, online communities. And we need to remember that the online also is a space for building strong links between people from oppressed backgrounds.
Julie Gommes, we have one journalist, one of our correspondents who told me recently, she said, you know, I don't go on Twitter because it's just a den of trolls, and especially if you're a woman. Do you feel like that?
Not so much, but it depends of people. If you are young, if you are maybe black, if you are Jewish, you know, racism is racism, even online. Online harassment is harassment. So we have laws against that. And we have to first, after education, make respect the laws. The laws exist. We can find the people, technically. That's easy. So it is possible to just make respect the law, go to see the police. The only problem is that maybe the judge don't have enough people to work with him or enough money to...
So the laws are already on the books, you say?
Yeah.
The French government wants to change the laws and make them tougher. We'll talk about it when we come back. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. We're talking about the LOL League, which was this private Facebook message group, which is started as a place to tell jokes among up-and-coming journalists and ad men. It turned into a place for targeting younger women who are aspiring to join the business. And it's been a scandal that has... made heads fall. At least 6 people have been either suspended, resigned, or been sacked from their jobs since this story was broken. With us to talk about it, attorney Ruben Sfadj, who is co-founder of Never Without Her, Jamais Sans Elle, an advocacy group that promotes gender parity. Ketsia Mutombo, chair and co-founder of the feminist organization against cyberbullying, also a law student. And Julie Gommes, cybersecurity manager at Cognizant Technology Consulting, and from Capistrano Beach, California, psychologist Diana Graber, author of Raising Humans in the Digital World. France's women's rights minister, by the way, has tweeted her support to LOL League victims, Marlène Schiappa, suggesting that there's nothing to prevent looking into an extension of the statute of limitation. We've just extended it to 10 years for rape of minors. I will broach the subject with the Justice Minister, Nicole Belloubet. The statute of limitation, the bullying happened in a period between 2009 and 2012, Ruben Sfadj, or did it?
Yeah. Exactly. That's the main question. The one we started out with Jamais Sans Elle. We started out immediately when the story broke out. We started out.
This was last Friday.
Exactly. We started out a group of attorneys willing to do pro bono work for the victims, and basically to at least give the first thing that the victims need, which is the right to an attorney and the right to consult with an attorney and make sure whether they have a case or not and whether they may get a day in court. And when the story broke out, it immediately broke out in every media outlet as happening from 2009 to 2012. It's not that simple. Many stories continued way later than that. And I would add also that focusing on cyberbullying restricts the scope of investigation.
Because you had things like a woman getting a crank call for a job application, and of course it was just a joke on her.
There's not just cyberbullying. When you start hearing and reading about the stories and hearing the victims, which is the most important thing to do, you realize there is, of course, cyberbullying. There's identity theft. There are even some more important and more dangerous things going on than just that. And it's not just about online activism or online bullying. It went well into something that's been going on for a very long time. And it's somehow another expression also of the glass ceiling and a way of preventing women from getting access to some jobs. And the most important thing right now is to make sure that the victims are free to have their day in court if they so wish, are free to have their case analyzed by a competent lawyer, and not just reading that, you know, it's over. The statute of limitations is prevailing here, and forget about it. We're done with you. I think that's just not fair.
So it's not just a case of extending statute of limitation. And you were saying before the break, the current laws are good. What do you think about this proposal to extend the statute of limitation?
Could be good. Could be good. Could be really, really good to attack those guys and to prevent because that happened, because maybe we arrest them because they were trial guys or other people who are racist or who want to insult Roman, Jewish, or everybody. They will see and they will say, okay, now justice is here, and we are afraid we will stop that because of the justice, because of the law.
The facts, a lot of them do date back a decade. Is there any attenuating circumstance for this behavior back then? You read that apology again, where the guy said that the co-founder of the website, the founder of the website, saying, you know, we just were blind to the fact that we were hurting people that much.
You know, that's like teenager in the school. They are doing little groups and try to fight the little guy, or that's the same. That's the same. And what you do when your child does that, you tell him that's not good. You punish him. They are doing the same. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of it is, I mean, we call it cyberbullying because it originates online, but we would be wrong to make it an online thing. The most troubling consequences and the most troubling facts were not online and cyberbullying. They were very much offline and real-life bullying.
Yeah, in parties and...
Obviously, yes. And there is, I think, if we can have on this very sad and very stupid story a moment of reckoning about the place that is left for women in those high status and highly public jobs and industries, it would be a very good thing.
Well, Diana Graber, you were telling us your focus is often on kids in middle school. Is this any different?
Yeah. Well, listening to the conversation, a couple of things struck me. You know, the research shows that real life bullying is still more predominant than online bullying, believe it or not. In addition to that, it's the same people who do both real life bullying and online bullying. So I take that into consideration working with middle school kids, because I think that's a really important time to have them understand the consequences of their online actions. And one of the things that's happening now with people getting online so early is that we don't see facial expressions and we don't understand how our actions are impacting others. So that's a lot of things that I work with middle school kids with, is to understand that there's a real person behind the screen. And sometimes even when that real person is doing hurtful things, it could be because that person's hurting. So it's super important to remind people of that these are real people with real consequences. And I think it's important to do that when kids are young, so they take those lessons into their adulthood and beyond.
So you're teaching that lesson to adolescents. How do you teach that lesson to adults, that it's real people you're targeting?
Well, our program, it's now in 42 U.S. states, and it's in some other countries. And part of it are take-home activities that the children have to do with their parents at home. And so I call that the triple up theory. I try to get the parents to do the lessons with their kids so they can learn these things too. And it's important for parents to remember that they're a role model. All adults, we're the role models for the next generation. they're watching how we act. And, we have a real problem here in the United States with Twitter. At the very, very top, we're not getting good role modeling. So it's more important than ever for other adults to start being kinder, nicer, respectful online so that we can model that for the people watching.
All right. Already, you mentioned the fact that having to say that it's real people. Right now, there's the question then of, do you do away with pseudonyms on social media? Already last month, long before the LOL League came to light, the French president called for the beginning of the end of pseudonyms on the internet. Let's listen to Emmanuel Macron.
Si on arrive à faire circuler l'information véritable,
if we share accurate information, the words from experts whom we can hold accountable, each of them saying who he is and where he's speaking from, without anonymity, our fellow citizens will have more to say in public decisions. But firstly, we need to establish the guidelines for information in a healthy democracy.
démocratique du statut de l'information.
Ketsia Mutombo, if I write an article on France24.com, which is, by the way, an excellent website, I sign my name on it, and I stand by what I write. Should it be the same on social media?
I don't think so. I think what the president said was really a dangerous take on cyber abuses and cyberbullying. Anonymity must remain a right for all.
In fairness to Emmanuel Macron, he wasn't referring to this because he said that he made these remarks last month. It's more. No, he was saying more generally case, how there's to stop trolling and to stop.
It's really something I believe, regardless of this League of LOL affair. It's about anonymity protects marginalized people, victims from domestic violences, people that from the LGBTQI+ community that's still in the closet, or people just wanting to have to exercise their free speech rights online. Anonymity is not the ground of violences online because, and I think this case illustrates it really well. Many perpetrators of violences know their victim and their victim know them in real life. So it's not about anonymity online, it's about the violences we allow to happen in real life in our social systems.
Yeah, one of the LOL League's victims, the blogger who goes by the name of Daria Marks, that is a pseudonym. She says she likes using a pseudonym. She said, when Daria Marks received death threats when they assaulted her with hundreds of photos of, pardon my language, shit and piss, I could tell myself it wasn't me. It saved me many a time.
I would like to point out two things, and two things only about this. First, what I think Emmanuel Macron was talking about is the need to be able to originate a story in order to check its veracity. Not the freedom of any individual to protect their identity and their free speech. I completely agree with you. That's number one. Number two is Ligue du LOL, all these guys, they weren't anonymous. We know their names. We know who they are, and everybody knew.
Where they were.
And they weren't hiding behind any veil of anonymity. They were doing it completely out in the open. So I don't think that's the issue here, really.
Technically, we don't need that, because the judge have just to ask the IP address of the person who do harassment. Twitter gives the IP address to the judge and the internet providers in France.
So is Emmanuel Macron being misquoted here?
I think so.
Maybe, yeah.
I think so. I think that I think this is not the same debate, in my opinion.
Personally, the ability. I saw people from his party saying that anonymity was a bad thing just after this case. So.
And also Mounir Mahjoubi,
I think this might be a political state.
Mounir Mahjoubi is the Secretary of State in charge of digital affairs.
Yeah, and he said he is pro-anonymity. He doesn't want to stop anonymity. So he does not agree with Emmanuel Macron on this topic. And I think that's That's a good debate.
But hang on, let me bring in Diana Grabber on this, because we've seen, we were talking about in part one of our discussion, how trying to act like the big dog turns into mob rule, and you have this sort of mob rule effect. And we see that in some of these social media websites. After there was the Pittsburgh shooting, there was talk about this chat group called 4chan. What do you think about this debate about whether or not people should be anonymous? And you can say whatever you want. You were just saying it. You hit send and there's no consequences.
Wonderful benefits of being anonymous for marginalized people and people who don't fit in elsewhere and maybe want to explore something under anonymity. That being said, it's interesting with the internet, especially as we get further into it, it's really hard to be anonymous online because eventually somebody finds out. It's so many people join private groups only to find out later that someone has taken a screenshot or shared information elsewhere. And so that idea of being anonymous, it's hard to do online these days, and it's getting harder and harder. So I think that we all have to go online with the thought that eventually someone's going to find out our actions, who we are, attach it to our digital reputation. Is that how we want to be known online?
The email has been around for 20 years, and sometimes you write things on email, and of course they stick. It's sticky sometimes. Email, and you wonder, is there a learning curve? Well, let me put it to you, Ketsia. Do younger people get social media better than the older generation when it comes to the netiquette that Julie was describing?
From what I see, I would say that younger people use the internet better. I feel it's because they grew up and the internet and social media was already here. And older people,
they understand better the consequences of
not really the
of picking on someone, of making fun turning into something nasty.
Not necessarily the consequences, but they feel more attached to. Some people being on the internet since they are like 5 years old, and they grew up into meeting new people, into finding different hobbies. So I think it is generational things. Having the internet as an adult person and having access to the internet since you are a kid might be different for the age changes online.
Julie Gommes, what's going to be the impact of the Ligue du LOL scandal?
I hope the impact will be the same as Me Too in Hollywood. I hope we will clean that, and also I hope community will alert more when there is problem, when you see someone who harass, when you see someone who is racist online, even in the street. We have to alert. We have to say, okay, that is not good, and we can go to the judge with that. And if we have more and more and more trial on that, that will be better.
Do you feel, though, that's the case? It's been more than a year now since the Me Too movement took hold, and it took hold here as well in France.
Yeah, and that's good, because in Hollywood, some actors, you never see them since this moment. So we have to do the same, maybe, with the guy who are doing harassment online or in the street.
I would say that right now, at least what we are doing with Jamais Sans Elle and my fellow attorneys, before turning this into a witch hunt, which I'm not saying you're doing or advocating, let me be clear, but before turning this into a witch hunt, we should focus our attention on the victims, and we should focus our attention on those women and men also who basically got their lives sometimes broken, but sometimes just their careers. And it's
a surprising number of those coming forth are now former journalists.
Absolutely.
And have changed lines of work.
And this is not, I mean, we're calling, again, at the risk of repeating myself, those were circles where people knew themselves in real life. And they acted out in real life. And the consequences are very much in real life.
How much would you say this is a French story?
I would say that part of it, yes, is something that's been going on for a while. It's a very Parisian story. Parisian. But on the other hand, you know, as somebody with a background abroad as well, I couldn't very honestly say it's only been happening in France. It's also another glass ceiling story of, you know, male preventing women from accessing high-level jobs. That's also what's happening, and it's also where we should take our fight, allowing women to fight back and to get, at least are they in court about it, and eventually to not be seen as victims and potential targets by those hipster, you know, new coming types.
Diana Greber, do you see this as a Parisian story when you first read it?
Oh my gosh, not at all. I mean, this is global. You know, we're dealing with this everywhere in the world. And the thing is, you know, the internet knows no boundaries. So we're one big community online. I mean, this is so reminiscent of so many instances in the United States. I mean, just 2 years ago, you know, 10 students accepted to Harvard University were on a private Facebook page making inappropriate racial memes, etc., and they all lost their acceptances to the university. So this is happening here, it's happening elsewhere, and it's something that we have to get our arms around all over the world.
All over the world. Julie Gommes, again, when you look at the fallout we've seen, there's already been a half dozen who've either resigned or been suspended. You heard Ruben Sfadj say, don't paint everyone with the same brush stroke in these instances. It's tough.
Maybe, but we have to teach, and we can teach with the law. We can teach just people how to respect the law, and that will happen at the beginning, and after, people will see that happen, and they will be more clever and maybe more respectful.
So the women who were targeted were the ones who described themselves as feminists at the beginning of La Ligue du LOL.
Some of them were black, some of them were gay. So it was not just a story about feminists, it was a story about different people who were targeted because they were different.
Targeted because they were different?
Different of them. Yes.
Is it a watershed moment?
I think for us, we are, in France at least, we are talking about on cyberbullying at some gendered violences. There hasn't been enough of a discussion before? No, it's often happened in a way to downplay it, saying it's a young people thing because they're not careful with how they use their social medias. But now we understand that people are well integrated in society, having good jobs, being popular. Can partake in those kind of violences is not something always from people in their basements hiding from the world. People with a lot of social activities can be bullies online, and where I agree with you is we need to repeat that cyber violences are not just online. They have physical consequences such as stalking, harassment. So it's really important to denounce cyberbullying because it's a way to...
it's the first step.
It's the first step, but it's a way to denounce real-life violences.
Ketsia, Mutombo, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Ruben Sfadj as well, Julie Gommes, and Diana Greber for being with us from Capistrano Beach, California. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. So this really is getting a lot of attention in overseas media. Already yesterday, BuzzFeed had an article about this, accounting how the scandal broke. But today, really, a lot of the world's media are talking about it. It's been called French journalism's own Bullingdon Club. I suppose a way of referring to an old boys club, I guess. French boys club of journalists accused of bullying women online. And the Ligue du LOL cyberbullying case is the French media's day of reckoning. And indeed, that's what Libération, which essentially broke the story, if you like, two of their own journalists being fired. They're suspended, indeed. This is the French media's day of reckoning, I suppose. That's how you could translate that. And indeed, in their editorial, they talk about how one of the consequences, the editorial is on consequences, is one of the consequences is Twitter, journalists using Twitter who work for a particular media should be conscious that even if it's an anonymous account, that you are essentially speaking on behalf of that publication, and that is something that might become more and more established, even though a lot of people do make it very clear on their Twitter accounts that they're speaking on their own behalf, not on behalf of the publication. So that might be one way in which this evolves. People will not be able to get away with behaviour deemed personal when they actually are contracted to work for a particular publication as a journalist. What else do we have, Francois? There's a lot of people saying one way that this could another consequence could be that hiring in the French media landscape should be a more open, transparent process. There's a lot of, I guess, in terms of the old boys club factor, people hiring their friends or hiring people from within the company. And this promotes, I suppose, what could be a very male, white, cliquish environment. And if there was a more transparent, open hiring process, you would have more plurality.
But there are rules about posting job listings.
There are, but there are also unwritten rules about hiring people that you've been. Basically, these guys were seen as the new wave of French journalists who are able to master the internet and social networks and to create a buzz and bring some new air into French journalism. Turns out they actually learned that by harassing people. And I completely agree. Making those offers public and opening the door is very important.
I think that's one comment that's certainly been coming through. Senior French journalists should use their power against matters like sexism, racism, discrimination, instead of starting it up. I think a lot of comments of that nature, that the shock factor of a group that should be promoting, Republican values and whatnot, especially because a lot of these people were working for left-wing publications, and in fact, they were involved in this sort of trolling. It's particularly shocking for that. Again, this is a lot of people giving their stories or their accounts. This is one of the people who Melania Vanga, who said that she was a victim of this, and indeed it wasn't just women; it was also people LGBT and whatnot. One of the most gutting things the Ligue du LOL has been confirmed to have done is set up a fake job interview with a woman, secretly recorded, and put the audio on SoundCloud. And I presume you were talking about that as well. That was the editor-in-chief of Les Inrocks. Anyway, there's so much more to say on this, but it brings up the whole issue of trolling, whether Twitter itself is a space that is very, I suppose, that allows for trolling to happen more readily. But anyway, we're out of time. It's certainly putting those
and whether
issues
that trolling is getting worse or better. Is it getting worse or better?
It's getting worse, I think.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
James Creedon of Media Watch fame, many thanks. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.